Welcome. In today's episode, we are going to make this version of the trivet. You may notice that it is very similar to our table runner, and I just happen to have a lot of this fabric left over from a project, but for the versions I will be sewing, we'll be using this fabric. And again, please, there are kits available if you'd like to pick one up from either Chin Park, or we can have them sent to any other branch. But for this particular project, you would need 14 2.5 by 5-inch rectangles and 4 2.5 by 5-inch rectangles of 4 different other fabrics that I refer to as A, B, C, or D. That said, this would look just as nice if you used a variety of different fabrics and made it a very scrappy look. I just happen to have some of these fabrics laying around and thought that this would be cute for my daughter has a new coffee bar. So I'm pretty much going to go over a lot of the instructions we did for the table runner, and it might help if you also could take a look at the table runner, because I talk about whether or not to wash fabric, whether or not to use starch, and how to iron correctly. So let's begin. And what we are going to do is, I have laid out the first 3 rows here, and I would suggest that once you lay out all of your fabrics, I would take a picture with my phone so that you know where the placement is going to be. And I also suggest, and I always do this, is I tend to take a little piece of scrap paper and I pin that this is row 1, this will be row 2, and I want to get this down because we don't want to get it anywhere we would be sewing, and this will be row 3. And we're going to work on these 3 rows. Let's take rows 2 and 3 and move them to the side. And let's concentrate on row 1. And what we are going to do is we are going to sew these rectangles. We're going to push right sides together. Okay. I am an advocate of pinning, and put one there and one here. And then the blue right sides together to this yellow. Again, make sure you line it up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to leave that little piece of yellow at the end. And while we're at it, let's take row 2 and let's put those and pin those in place. So what we will do is we will go over to the sewing machine and we will sew these all at once in what is called chain piecing. Okay, and you don't want to do what I just did. You want to have it right nice, edges flush to one another. Okay. So here's row 2, and here is row 1, and we are going to go over to the sewing machine. For this trivet, we're using the same design, as I'm trying to reinforce how important it is to sew an accurate 1/4 inch seam. In the table runner episode, I showed where there's different feet that you can buy that will help you, or you can do what I do, and to help you see exactly where the 1/4 inch line is, I just take a piece of simple painter's tape and I line it up so that I know that if I keep my sewing edge right up against that painter's tape, I should be sewing an accurate 1/4 inch seam. The thread I am using is just a light beige. And in quilting, you don't need to match your thread to your piecing until really you're doing some quilting or when you're sewing down the binding, because no one will ever see this thread. So it's a good way to use up some nasty color thread that you'll never, have a need for. So what we're going to do is we are going to take this first piece. I am going to hold down the tail of the thread, take the presser foot, push it down. Okay, so now very slowly, just going to start to sew. I'm going to take out my pins because it's very bad to sew over a pin, although I must admit I'm very bad at that and frequently sew over pins. And so chain piecing is that now I will take this piece and just butt it right up there. This way we're being very economic in, oh, I just sewed over a pin, sorry. We're being very economical in our use of thread. We're not wasting a lot of thread. And then we'll take, this is the first pair of row 1. And we'll sew it. And I would suggest using a nice steady sewing speed because it's easier to control it if you're going slower than if you speed up, and you have a better chance of sewing that accurate 1/4 inch seam. Now, what we're going to do is that I just clip this, and I'm going to keep these all together, and I remember that this one is the end, so I'm going to fold the fabric over, and I'm going to rub my fingernail against it, kind of almost as if you were creasing a piece of paper. And then I'm going to put this right there and pin it into place. Okay. And we'll sew. Always hold the tails of the threads, otherwise you can get quite a mess. It'll almost look like a little rat's nest or a bird's nest underneath, and no one wants that. And let's just sew that all the way down. Okay, we'll clip this thread. First we'll finger press this way again, creasing it, and then we know that this is row 1 because it has that nice lovely 1 on it. We'll crease that, and then we're going to put right sides together, and we'll pin into place. Okay, and we'll start this one again. Oops. Fabric flush against the painter's tape, holding the tails. And then we will come over here to where we have this one. And we know this is row 2 because we've there, and then crease that. I'm going to Get them nice and flush together, right at the edge. Put 2 pins, and then let's just continue to sew them. And just like that, we have rows 1 and 2 completed. So take row 1 and take the one that we didn't finger press. This is called finger pressing. And there's row 1. And let's open up row 2. And now we have row 2. Okay? So, by finger pressing, we haven't had to go over to the iron yet. And now we need to sew row 1 to row 2. We know that the midpoint for row 2 is right here between rectangles 2 and 3. But to find the midpoint for row 1, we are going to take row 1 and we're going to fold it in 2 places. We're going to fold it right here on the corner, but then also we are going to fold it right where these 2 seams come together. You see how the blue is kind of fitting into the groove of the yellow. And by doing that, it's 2 different ways to make sure that it's the midpoint. So we go like this. Let me do this so you can see better. We have the midpoint, and then we're going to just rub our thumbnail or fingernail right there. We'll open it up, and we can see that crease. And just in case, we'll put a pin to make it easier. And then we're going to take that and we're going to fold row 1 onto row 2, making sure that where that pin is, see that pin? It's right there where that point is. We're going to match those edges into the seam. See how the pin's right there where the seam is? So what we're going to do then is we're going to hold it real tight. We don't want anything to move. And we're going to pin that in place. Then what we'll do is we'll just proceed to pin the rest of the row. And what I like to do is I like to do it wherever there's a seam. So here, and then here. Okay, and then here. And what you're doing is you're making sure it's flush, the edges are flush to one another. And then we go about here. So we'll put this at the edge, and we'll start our stitching a little before it. You want to make sure it's to be as accurate as possible. And then we'll come down this way, and we'll just get this seam, and then you can feel the seam. So there's one here, and there's one here, and I need one more pin and one here. Okay, so now we will sew those 2 rows together. And we have the right sides together, fabric right sides together, and we have that midpoint. So we're going to hold the thread tails. We're going to start stitching just a couple stitches before, so that, and what we're going to do is we're going to do our 1/4 inch seam all the way down, taking care to remove the pins as we go. And again, take your time. . 1 And if need be, just adjust as you go. Sometimes, fabric slips. I find that this painter's tape is very nice because it gives you plenty of guidance as to how to keep things, the fabric in place so that you do get a very nice, accurate 1/4 inch seam. Okay. And we'll just go a little farther. And now we have already sewed rows 1 and 2 together. Let's see. There's row 1 and row 2. So let's go over to the ironing board and I will show you how to iron this open. Ironing in quilting is much different than ironing a blouse or a skirt. We never want to do any kind of motion like this where we're pulling or possibly distorting the fabric. So what we'll do is what we're doing is we're placing the iron for a couple seconds on the seam, and the theory behind this is that the heat is setting the seam into the fabric, and this will make a nice crisper seam. Then we're going to gently fold the fabric over, and a common mistake is that a lot of people would then just put the iron down. You don't want to do that. What I do is that your fingers are basically one of your best tools. Kind of feel, and you'll feel that it feels flat. And again, rub your forefinger or thumb or whatever finger and just kind of crease it again. The fabric is still warm and it makes life a little easier. And then when you're done, again, just up and down. We don't want to do anything that would pull or in any way distort our shapes. And so there we have rows 1 and 2. So now I have sewed rows 1 and 2 and 3 together and rows 4, 5, and 6 together. You could do it that you would sew 1 and 2 together and then 3 and 4 together and then 5 and 6 together and put them into 2, but I felt this was just as easy. So once again, we know that the middle of row 4 is right here, this intersection of rectangles 2 and 3. We are going to fold row 3 in half to find the middle of this pink rectangle. So again, we're going to just go edge to edge, and then we're just going to see how these seams just want to nest into one another. One's going this way, one's going that way. And we're just going to, again, take our nail, give it a nice crease if you want. Then we can put a pin right in that crease. There we go. And then we are going to, and I'll put a pin here too so you can see. We are going to take row 4 and we'll have, see how we have those 2 pins right on top of one another, okay? I'm going to hold that in place. I'm going to put a pin here, hold it in place, put a pin there. I'm going to carefully go underneath, pull out those 2 pins. My finger has never left the spot, and I will just to be sure, put another pin there. Okay, wait, I'm a pin short. There we go. So then what we'll do is we'll pin it like we pinned rows 1 and 2. We'll feel, okay, there's a seam here. We'll place a pin. Now, and these are just my suggestions. Everyone has to find what is the best method for them. Some of you may find that you feel you don't need any pins, and that's fine. I'm going to remove this pin for number 4 because I feel it's a little in my way, and going to do the edge right there, and then we'll come this way, and I feel a seam there, and then there's one there, and here, and then right here. So now we're going to sew rows 1, 2, and 3 to 4, 5, and 6, and soon we will have a trivet top almost complete. Let me move my needle up. We are going to start sewing again a couple, maybe like a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch before we come to the seam. And we're holding those thread tails, and we are sewing and removing pins. And nice and slow will give us the best chance of sewing accurately. If we don't have to, we don't need to use that dreaded seam ripper. Okay. Okay, now let's take this over to the iron, and once again we'll practice setting a seam and then opening up the trivet to its finished size. Okay, so now we have sewed rows 1, 2, and 3 to 4, 5, and 6, and again we are going to place the iron. And we are just going to, for a few seconds at a time, set that seam. Then we are going to just gently push it this way. And again, with our forefinger, just very nicely. I like doing it with my forefinger because I can feel that there is nothing pleating underneath. I can feel if it's not bending the right way. Sometimes a lot of people, you'll see them just go like this. And I think that's sometimes where you get a row that has a bit of a curve to it. And we want to avoid that. So then we're just going to go over it again. And then what we'll do is we are going to remove all of our little numbers because they have served their purpose. And when we're all done, I like to give it a little spritz with some starch or just water. Buy these from a hair supply store. You'll pay a lot less than if you buy it from a quilting store. And we're just going to lightly mist. And then what we're going to do is just continue just moving it from space to space. We're not seeing anything move or become distorted. Everything is, but the starch just gives it a little extra stiffness so that as we move on to the quilting portion. Okay, now we're going to take this over and we're going to just square it up, or in this case, rectangle it up. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to square up or even up the edges so that it'll be ready for us to begin to quilt it. So what we're going to do is we are going to place this horizontal line against the edge of this row and do it at a spot where we can see, let's see, there, we can see fabric all the way. Now to cut this, you could take a pencil and trace it and then cut it, but if you're using a rotary cutter, 3 fingers in your thumb, that, and then just very carefully and slowly, and sometimes walking your hand up so that there's no distortion. And there's one side. And then just going to do the same thing for this side. Okay. There you go. Now you have a completed trivet, and in our next installment I will show you how we take this top and some batting and a backing and how we can do an easy quilting design on it, and then I will show you how to bind it so that you have a finished trivet. Thanks for joining us.